presentation so far. So welcome everyone. I want to thank you all so much for coming this evening to the Discovery Center. We have a great presentation. Our education specialist Wallis is going to talk to us, as you can tell, all about the spotted lanternfly today, what it is, why it's important that we don't have it here in New Hampshire, and lots of other things. We'll have some time for questions and answers, so if you have any questions, Wallis is going to be happy to answer those for you, and we'll kind of go from there. After the presentation, we are going to have a planetarium show, all about the night sky, and then hopefully, if things are clear outside, we'll have some telescope observing as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So without further ado, I will pass it on. Oh, excellent. Wonderful. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Wallis, and thank you so much again for coming. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. So, as Amanda said, my name is Wallis. We're going to be talking about the spotted lanternfly tonight, but before we get started with that, I just want to do a little bit of an introduction, tell you a little bit about me. So, again, I'm an education specialist here at the Discovery Center. I do quite a mixed bag of things. I work with high school students to create museum exhibits, go on outreaches, like this picture right here, me and Amanda. We went to a school and did a really fun discovery experience that we do where we simulate living and working in space as astronauts. So yeah, just lots of different things here at the center. And then of course I'm also the resident dinosaur here at the center. It's me in the dinosaur suit. Yeah, and then before working here, so I'm actually from Seattle, Washington originally, and then I went to college at Bard College in the Hudson Valley in New York. And I got my BA in biology there. And there I studied for my senior thesis invasive Asian jumping worms. So I'm really interested in looking at invasive species and researching them. So this is just a little photo of what my research looked like, and down here is a photo of the invasive Asian jumping worm. And yes, they do actually jump. They're just like, they look like any other earthworm. They are earthworms, but when you pick them up in your hand, they wriggle all around. It's pretty gross. And actually, all earthworms here in the Northeast are invasive. We don't have any native earthworms up here. So yeah, all right. Now, to get started, as I just said, mention invasive species. Let's actually talk about what an invasive species is. What an invasive species is. So what are they and why do we care? So invasive species are, as their name suggests, harmful invaders of ecosystems that they aren't native to. But just because a species is invasive, or non-native, that doesn't necessarily mean they're invasive. So how invasive species spread are through human activity primarily. So they're often spread through, their ways of being spread are wide and varied. So for instance, many non-native plants are brought here for ornamental and decoration purposes, and that can be, like I said, decoration purposes or also ground cover. So an example of that is English ivy. Another method is through global trade and transport, and that's like rats. Like rats would sneak onto ships, and so then they were brought various different places. And like I mentioned, earthworms. So, and the way that the earthworms were brought here, and like other bugs, like spotted lanternflies, are through the cocoons or eggs getting stuck in mulch or shoe treads or something like that, and being brought in shipments or via people just walking around. So again, through global trade. So why do we care? Invasive species have many impacts on the ecosystems that they've been introduced to. So they alter community structure, meaning that they can completely change the way that the ecosystem functions. They also alter community composition, which is a fancy way of saying that they change the types of species, plants, mammals, birds, and insects in the ecosystem. And the most common ways that they do this is through competition for resources, like food and shelter, and also predation. So they also alter community richness of ecosystems, and richness is the number of different species in the ecosystem. And they also alter diversity, which accounts for the number of species as well as how many individuals are in the ecosystem. So a way to explain this, because richness, diversity, it's just, again, kind of fancy science words to explain what this means. So say you have 10 species and they all have the same amount of individuals in that group of species, and they all make up the same part of the ecosystem. That's pretty good. But if there is an uneven number of species in each, so say there's 10 species still, but in each species there's maybe one, but then in one individual, but in another species there's a ton of them, and that's an invasive species, that really kind of skews the amount of resources that each species is taking. So since invasive species are implants to ecosystems and habitats they are not native to, they often don't have to worry about their own natural predators, and they'll thrive and reproduce more if the climate and conditions are more favorable than where they came from. So an example of this, anecdotally, so Pablo Escobar, who was, to put it lightly, a Colombian drug lord, when he died, he had an entire estate of animals on his property, lots of different kinds. Some of them, though, were easy to move. Others weren't, like his hippos. So when he died, 4 of his hippos were left on his estate, and they were deemed, again, too dangerous to relocate, because hippos are actually some of the most dangerous species to humans that we can encounter, and they actually kill about 500 people a year. So as of 2014, the 4 hippos that were left multiplied to 40 hippos, and the population is continuing to grow, and there are now an estimated population of 70 hippos just roaming around Colombia, which, is not their native habitat. So they are really wreaking havoc on the ecosystem, and they've killed people and cattle. So they're able to thrive in Colombia because they don't have their biggest predator there anymore, obviously, which is, the lion, and they also don't have to worry about a drought season since Colombia is a tropical climate. So, yeah, who knew there were hippos in Colombia and that they were an invasive species? I only found out about that recently, but it's pretty crazy. All right, so now that we've talked about what exactly an invasive species is and what makes a species invasive, let's now talk about the spotted lanternfly. All right, so to get started, just going to talk a little bit about their origin, identification, and their behavior. So the spotted lanternfly is a type of plant hopper native to regions in China. And so although they have wings and they fly, the way that they get from plant to plant, tree to tree, is primarily, as the name suggests, by plant hopping. So in their adult stage of life, their forewings are beige and spotted with vibrant crimson hindwings. So I'll just go back here. You can see these are the forewings, and here we have the hindwings. So they're this really, really bright, beautiful crimson color. And then they've got the spotting here, which is what they're named for. And you can see that when their wings are closed, you can still kind of see the crimson through them. So this is typically what we see when we think of spotted lanternflies, but you can see every single stage of life is pretty unique. And the 4th instar stage is this really, really bright red color. So they're really easy to distinguish between a younger stage of life. So the way that they feed on plants is by sucking sap out of the plants. And they feed on many different types of trees and shrubs, but their preferred host is something known as the tree of heaven, which is native to both China and Taiwan, but was recently introduced to the U.S. itself and is also invasive. So it is also an invasive species, which you might be thinking, all right, well, if we've got one invasive species that likes another invasive species, that might cancel out, right? We'll talk about that later, and no, it doesn't, and it tends to make things worse. All right, so here is just a little bit of a timeline of the spotted lanternfly invasion in the Northeast and Midwest. And I was told this kind of looks like I'm describing going to war with them, the timeline of a war, and you know what? It is a war. So in 2012 was the assumed first introduction of the spotted lanternfly to the U.S. So although the first spotted lanternfly invasion wasn't detected in Pennsylvania until 2014, it's thought to have been introduced 2 years earlier in 2012. And scientists think that this is what happened because they found the presence of older egg masses in a shipment of stone, which is how we think they were introduced. And in addition to being an invasive species here, they are also an invasive species in Korea and Japan, and within 3 years after their introduction to South Korea, they have pretty much completely covered the entire country. Right, so in 2014, 2 years after that first introduction, the first infestation of spotted lanternflies was found in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I say infestation because there are some places where people have found like 1 or 2 spotted lanternflies, but this is, an infestation is pretty unique looking, and I'll show you a picture of it later. They pretty much like swarm and cover a tree, and it's pretty gross. So then 2018 to 2021, states surrounding Pennsylvania started reporting sightings and infestations, and these states included New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. And then in 2022, even more states have confirmed infestations, and that's Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And so this is just a bit of a map that shows where they've invaded. So Berks County, I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it's right around here in Pennsylvania. And then you can see the progression down to the north a little bit, to the west, up towards us. So the small pink dots, which are kind of hard to see, like one right here in New York and one right here in Massachusetts, those are examples of places where people have seen an individual spotted lanternfly, whether that be just one on a tree or dead. And then the blue is where infestations have actually been found. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the negative impacts that they have on ecosystems. So now that since I've talked about, where they are in the U.S. and making a big deal about this, we might as well talk about why they're bad. So, like I said, spotted lanternflies feed on the sap of host plants. So how they do this is they pierce the host plant with a part of their mouth that they use like a straw. So they pierce the trunk or any part of the plant, and they suck the sap out of it. And although this isn't especially bad for the tree or plant when it's 1 or 2 of them, they do swarm in large numbers. So this is what a tree with an infestation looks like. So you can see that it's just completely covered, and it's just, in numbers like that, they're able to obviously take a lot of sap out of the tree. As well, after they feed, they secrete something called honeydew, which is essentially sugar water, and the host plant becomes covered in this honeydew, and it makes it so the tree or plant has a difficult time photosynthesizing, and it also actually promotes the growth of mold, which can be harmful to the plant. So not only does it make it so the plant can't get the necessary light to photosynthesize, but it creates damage by letting the mold grow on it, and it also attracts other insects and wasps and ants. So this, in forest we have here, this can mean that the spotted lanternfly will feed on trees like maple, walnut, and other hardwood trees. And not only does this and the secretion of the honeydew affect the host plant, the honeydew can also fall onto lower vegetation underneath the tree, which can once again make it difficult for those plants to photosynthesize, and they can grow mold. So this right here is an example of the tree of heaven, which is the tree that lanternflies do primarily prefer when feeding. But again, like I said, they will feed on other plants that we have in our forests here. A big thing about these is their effect on agriculture, which is an interesting part of the attention drawn to these as an invasive species. So the first infestation recorded in Pennsylvania was on a crop of grapes. And along with grapes, they'll also feed on hops, apples, peaches, and other fruiting trees. And their presence in agriculture is causing a significant amount of damage and loss and profit. And I think this makes it a really interesting invasive species to look at, especially with the public attention to it, because it's hurting such a lucrative industry in a way that we see in other invasive species, but not to this extent. So, they're really hurting vineyards, which obviously the wine industry is pretty big, and so people are really terrified that they're going to come to California and infest the vineyards there. So not only are they coming into our forest ecosystems, they are also coming into agriculture. So right here is a prediction of possible habitats and predicted spread. So you can see right down here, this is where they have infested, but it's predicted that they will go much further over to the west and further up here, and then start infecting in parts along the western coast as well.
How will it get out to California?
So that is primarily through shipments. So shipments of goods. For a while in Pennsylvania, there was actually a quarantine for goods being shipped out, specifically firewood. So because the egg masses are so small and attached to things, if they're not killed, then when the shipment is dropped off, the egg masses are just there, and the spotted lanternflies will hatch. And since the entire U.S. is pretty much covered in the tree of heaven, as I mentioned, this makes it so essentially there's just a highway for the spotted lanternflies to go along. So no matter where they're dropped in the U.S., they will pretty much find their preferred host plant. So you can see too, here we are in New Hampshire, bright red, which means the possibility of them spreading here is pretty high. So I've been looking around because now that I've been reading about this more and, reading more about the tree of heaven, I realize they're everywhere. They're everywhere. So, every time I see one now, I'm kind of like looking at the trunk, seeing if I can see some, but I haven't spotted any yet. So that's good. But yeah, so they have the potential to really go all over the country. Yeah. So currently, our best form of management is just killing them. Yep. Yeah, so this is really what's being recommended just all over. And I have never seen any kind of response like this to an invasive species. People hate these things. So the wide public attention of the spotted lanternfly is actually really incredible, and that so many people know about it, and that it's becoming more and more known about every day. I don't know if any of you watch SNL, but they actually recently did a sketch on it. I was just, on YouTube the other night and was like, oh, I'm talking about that on Friday. That's great. So if you like SNL, I do recommend watching that. It is pretty funny. So, management has been turning all of us into bug stomping vigilantes. So yeah, you can see lots of videos of online. Really gross one is somebody took a bottle to a tree and just scooped all of them up the tree. Pretty nasty. So yeah, some of these are made by states. New York has a very similar flyer that they put all around the state and have on the state website, essentially saying kill the spotted lanternfly. And it's really easy for people to feel comfortable going and killing them because they don't sting or bite. They're actually completely harmless to humans. So unlike wasps, you can just approach them and stomp on them. And another way to stop their spread and to kill them before they even turn into the adult stage is to kill the egg masses. And you can do that by scraping them into alcohol. So again, if the egg masses are attached to any kind of shipment or transport or good or product, they can then become established at that location. So the best management is getting them before they hatch. And then since they don't have any natural predators here, which is part of what makes them such a good invasive species, they are able to breed pretty prolifically. But since they've been here for a few years now, and they don't have any negative reaction to us or any other kind of species, birds and other insects are starting to eat and predate them. So there's also kind of a natural management that's going on. So all of this being said, in the grand scheme of things, the spotted lanternfly is a somewhat new species here. So although we've seen an effect of them on agriculture pretty immediately and pretty, substantially, it still is going to take a little bit longer to see how they affect the ecosystems we have here, like the forests we have here, just because it's a little bit harder to see something like that as widespread versus when you see an infestation in a vineyard. So we're not entirely sure what they'll do to ecosystems, how they'll fit into the ecosystem, especially now that we see other birds and insects are starting to eat them. But we do know that they're still a pretty pervasive and destructive invasive species, and that they probably will have a substantial impact in the years to come. So, yeah, that's what I got for you. Amanda showed me how to do this. Isn't that fun? Yeah. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit and answer any questions.
You happen to have one in your pocket?
I wish. I know, that's the thing. They're really pretty, aren't they? Like, I mean, I feel like I'd just want to keep one as a pet, maybe. I have a cat who would love to play with one, though, so.
Okay. How big is one of those full grown?
So they are about maybe like this big.
Okay.
Yeah. So not huge, but I mean, I wouldn't want to get close to one.
So with the wings and everything spread out, they would be that size?
Yeah, about that big, yeah.
But if you see them on the side of a trunk or something, they'd probably be about...
Yeah, so we can go back to, it's a little bit hard to see the scale on here, but this is what they look like with their wings closed. So maybe a little bit bigger than that, maybe this big, but not huge, not huge.
Are they related at all to butterflies or moths?
No, they are a different kind of species entirely. They're called plant hoppers or sapsuckers.
Do you think they'll hurt the birds?
They, as to my knowledge and from what I've read about them and heard about them, they don't have any kind of adverse effects on other species. I mean, I guess one thing that could happen is indirectly, if they cause significant damage to a plant or tree that another species relies on for food or shelter or mating, that could be an effect, but that would be indirectly and not a direct correlation. So.
How far can they fly?
So they don't actually fly a whole lot. They mostly jump, which is why they're called plant hoppers.
No,
so,
because I was curious whether maybe like bats or something like that could get them.
Oh, yeah.
In like midair.
They could, yeah. I'm not sure about, and I don't know what they're nocturnal, or if they're nocturnal or how they behave in the night. But that is true. That bats, I mean, they'd probably be pretty tasty if you were a bat.
What did you say that natural food for was? Something of heaven?
Tree of heaven, yeah.
Tree of heaven?
Yep.
Do we have those around here?
We do, yeah. They're pretty much everywhere, all over the U.S.
I just know by some of the names.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Who?
Wait.
It's all right.
Sorry, what was that? You know them by a different name? Is that what you said?
The what?
She wants to know if you know them by a different name.
Yeah, I've never heard the name Tree of Heaven before.
Oh, yeah. So, well, here they're often called Tree of Hell, because they are so invasive.
Here they're called Tree of Hell.
Oh, okay.
They look like ferns.
Yes, yeah. So they've got this kind of like droopy leaf structure right here, thin leaves.
That's the Tree of Heaven.
Yeah, this is what it looks like.
Oh, looks to me like sumac.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah. So, just like many invasive species will be much better at existing in the ecosystem that they've been introduced to than a lot of native species, and they're really resilient. So, like weeds, the Tree of Heaven you'll see popping up like in really like, urban and more industrial areas, just because.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So I mean, around here I've seen like a few, I don't know, it's funny, like next to chain link fences and stuff like that, it looks very like.
I have heard that Concord is trying to get rid of them as much as possible to limit the
Yeah.
spread of the spotted lanternfly, but they are very prominent for decorations in Manchester and Nashua.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean,
You mean landscaping?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Unlike, you know, as I was talking about a bit before, so plants, unlike other species like insects or rats or mammals, are brought here on purpose. So the tree of heaven was definitely brought here on purpose as a decoration, and then later we figured out, oh, that's not good. Versus, you know, the spotted lanternfly, it was just because an egg mass got stuck in a shipment of stone. Just how we predict them to get here. So yeah.
I assume in China they do have some natural predators.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So they're part of in China, since they, you know, developed and adapted with the other species there of, you know, birds, insects, animals, plants. They're part of the ecosystem there, so they do have natural predators. But here, when they came, you know, they were a completely new transplant. So although there are things that can prey on them, it's just taking them a while to do so. But yeah.
I have a question from online. How long is the lifespan or life cycle of a spotted lanternfly?
Yeah, so I believe they are annual. If I'm getting that correct. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe they are an annual species, so not very long. Their life cycle is pretty short. So that means like here, it takes them a year to go through from being in the egg mass to then being an adult and completing the life cycle by laying their eggs.
Do they make any noise, like a cicada? You know what I mean? Do they make any noises or anything that you?
I don't believe they make any
I know
noise.
It might be a silly question. My children
No.
will ask me if they make noise, so I need to be able to go home and say that. But
Yeah.
like, do their legs work? You know what I mean? Like something
Yeah,
like that.
I don't believe they do. I mean, and that's that's just another.
I'm not. I feel like that's a biology kind
Yeah.
of like question, but.
Yeah. No, I mean yeah, I don't think they make any kind of noise, and that's again kind of an interesting thing about the spotted lanternfly is they just kind of are existing. They're just kind of hanging out, you know, I mean they're not like they're doing bad stuff to our agriculture and plants, but yeah, they really don't make any noise. I don't think they don't bite or sting, so they're like kind of a passive pest, if you will. Yeah.
So if we find them, is a general insecticide recommended?
Yeah, you can use insecticide, but yeah, for some reason, everything is about like stomping it. Yeah, I think it's just because it's the easiest and quickest, and you're not potentially killing other things when you use the insecticide. But yeah, pretty much anything works. Just that's the most effective management right now. Is if you see it, kill it. So.
What's more destructive, the larva state or the adult state?
Well, the adult stage of life is when they are actually feeding on the plants and thus creating damage. But the egg masses, when they're larvae, that's when it's not great because that's when they're transported. So I mean, theoretically, you know, adults could be transported, but because you know they're bigger and they're moving around, it's much easier to see them versus tiny little egg masses that get stuck to stuff. And they're also really pale in color, so again, they came on a shipment of stone, so they probably just completely blended in.
Another question from online. How did you get interested in invasive species?
Oh yeah, so well, I'll just start with how I going way back to when I talked a little bit about my thesis to begin with. So, like I said, I did my thesis in college on invasive jumping worms. And I decided to do that project because when I was little, I really loved worms. I would just go and dig them up and hold them in my palm. So when I was talking with my advisor and thinking about what I wanted to do, I was like, oh my gosh, worms, that makes total sense. And then learning about them and doing research on it, I just came to be really fascinated with invasive species and just how something that can be totally harmless and fine in one area when brought somewhere else can just wreak havoc on an ecosystem. So one interesting thing, this is just a little bit of a side note, just because I don't know how interesting it is. So on the islands of Saipan, Guam, and Rota, they pretty much all had the same ecosystem. However, at some point, the brown tree snake was introduced to Guam, and now on Saipan and Rota, if you go there, it's like a typical tropical jungle habitat. but on Guam, there are only Eurasian starlings and pretty much no other invertebrates, and it's completely silent there. And spiders have just overrun the island. So it's incredible how just, the introduction of one or two individuals of the species can just completely change the habitat, change an entire island. So, yeah.
If a person were to see one, should it be reported to some agency or anything?
I would say, yeah, probably. I'm not sure what agency that would be here.
There's a website
Yeah, is
called
there?
New Hampshire Bugs, nhbugs.com or .org.
Yeah.
And they have a form for a bunch of invasive species like the horned beetle, like we had mentioned earlier. And if you spot one, you take a picture or you collect it in a jar or something,
Yeah.
and they can contact you to collect the specimen if you have one. And spotted lanternflies is one of them.
There you
there's
go.
also some
Yeah.
resources on the New Hampshire agricultural site, the state site.
New Hampshire invasive species. No, is that what you said the
Bu-
name of it?
New Hampshire bugs.
New Hampshire,
New
oh.
Hampshire bugs.
That's easier.
Even easier.
Oh, different.
Hampshire bugs.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever seen one in real life? Like I have.
I have. I have. So I went down to Pennsylvania back in 2019 for a performance with some friends. And when we were sitting in this like football stadium, one started attacking my friend, just like flying into her hair and stuff. It was really gross. And we didn't know what to do because we weren't from Pennsylvania. And the people behind us said, "You have to step on it. You need to step on it." And we were like, "We don't want. It's huge. What do you? I'm not stepping on that." And they were adamant, so they came down and they stomped on it like a bunch of times for us. And it was really big. And then after, they were like talking to us and saying, if you don't live here, obviously you know nothing about them, but you need to go and check every bit underneath your car to make sure that none have crawled in, so you don't take them home.
Oh, wow.
But they were very bright. You could definitely tell exactly what it was. But they were very annoying. Just like,
Yeah.
if they get in your hair, they don't want to leave you alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was gross.
Boy.
Yeah. Yeah, but methods like that, like of checking, like transportation, like vehicles, personal vehicles is also a big one. So I believe zebra mussels, they're an invasive kind of mussels. So when boats are passing from one state line to another, often you'll have to undergo a boat inspection to see if any zebra mussels are stuck to the bottom of the boat. Okay, all right.
Thank you so much. Can you put the bug picture back up so I can have one in my phone, so if I see it, I know what it is?
Which one?
The
The big one?
really big one. Now I have to have this, so now I know what, there you go.
And you even got a label for it.
I'm gonna put that in there, so if I see one, I know to stop. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good shot of it, at least with his wings out.
Right.
I know, I just can't get over how pretty they are. Such a bummer.
They're kind of neat looking.
Yeah. It's always the pretty ones.
Kind of like a ladybug,
Mhm.
but like a moth-like.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep it in your phone, so when you see one, you like really know what it looks like.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to get a little closer to it, Liz? There you go. Good job.
Yeah. And even though when their wings are closed, you can't see the red, you'll still be able to see kind of like a pinkish sheen coming through. I think I can show you on the next page when you have the picture.
You got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So like right here, you can see that even though the wings are covering it,
That, especially.
yeah. Yeah, it just kind of shines through.
Looks like a pinkish color.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, come on.
So we don't wanna catch these, we wanna stop them.
Yes.
Even though they're pretty.
Yes.